Right, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for your appreciation of the entrance of the ambassador here. And we're very proud to have her in Finuge with us this evening. It's a great honour, not only for the McMahon family, but also for a small little crossroads and village like Finuge, that the American ambassador should grace us with her presence. And we deeply appreciate you coming here. Now, we have another very special individual here this evening, John B. Keane, and John B. would like to say a few words to you, and then he will wait for a while, not out and listen, and then he wants to retire. So
that was very easy for the politician.
I'm not going to call you Ambassador, Jean. 1,000 welcomes. It's always great to see you because you have done more for this country than any woman that we know. You're a tremendous presence, a tremendous asset to the country, and you have made Ireland once more into a community, which is the way we should be all. God bless you and thank you. I'm always very amused when I hear Jimmy Dean talking about how small Finuge is. They had two footballers playing today on the Kerry team that won the Munster Championship. That's no mean achievement. And it amuses me as well when he says, like, small, you get the impression that they were weak. After intimidating this door with terror and total physical abandon for generations. So much so that they say if you want to rise a Finuge man from the dead, the only sure way of resurrection is to get a Listowel jersey and wear it up, wave it over. I heard that from Pat Sullivan. But I'm here to make a very sharp tribute to my late lamented colleague Bryan McMahon. It would be very difficult for me to estimate how much I owe this man. I don't think it can be estimated in things like pounds, shillings and pence, because Bryan was a great man, and great men are rare. You would often say that a fellow had a great heart, and he was great at this and that, but Bryan was a great man all round, with a great compassion and understanding of people, with a very simple approach to life to make things easy for everybody. He was a lovely, kind man. And I remember not long before he died, I was complaining to him about an imagined slight which was given to me. And he said, put up with it. No sympathy at all, no message. But he was dead right. He was a beautiful writer, and he was a hard act to compete with when I was trying to catch up with him. And I still have the feeling that I'm trying to catch up with him. And it's an amazing thing that he seems to me in death to have assumed the same presence that he has in life. I still think I can see his fine, manly figure walking around the square. We ploughed different furrows. To put it another way, we might have walked in the same square, but we moved in different circles. But I would like to conclude that tribute to Bryan, because he was a wonderful man, and to wish you all luck and success here tonight. And before I leave you, a very small story about, not exactly a Finuge man, but a man from the immediate hinterland by the name of Sonny Caniff. He once employed two townies, two men I knew well, both of them with highly qualified in idleness and all-round uselessness. But anyway, he couldn't get local labourers to cut his turf, so he hired these two chaps to cut his turf, and he went down in the evening to inspect what they had done. And when he came back, his wife Nora said to him, well, did they cut much? He said they didn't cut as much as would make smoke for benediction. I owe not to them came to well, and by the best chef I don't the hand of the living. But before I go, just because herself is here, as I say. I'd like to impose upon you, many have had it before, an ancient North Kerry blessing which was calefacted by the ancient monks of Ballybunion, a minor order of winemakers who eventually succumbed to disappearance because of overindulgence in their own products. But here was what they composed, that the frost might never afflict your spuds, that your cabbages might always be free from worms, that the crows might never pick your stack, that your she-goat might never bite the puck. And should you by good fortune come into possession of a mare and donkey, may she be in full.
Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, that was a surprise to have John B here this evening. We deeply appreciate you coming along, and I think he has added enormously to the occasion. Now, for the evening, your narrator or MC will be Joe Murphy. As you know, Joe is, I suppose you would call him, artistic director of the St. John's Arts and Heritage Centre in the Stowe. And Joe, as you know, is doing a tremendous job with young people, especially in that centre. Now, before I introduce you to Joe, I suppose the reason why we're having this celebration of Bryan's life tonight is because he was very supportive of this event. And he was very close to Sean McCarthy, the writer that we are honouring here over the weekend. And he said of Sean at his graveside that Sean was a very special person. Indeed, he said he was unique. So also he was Sean's teacher, and he inspired Sean, and I think he taught Sean one lesson, that you didn't have to have second level education or university education to be a writer, and he gave him that confidence, and for that we are very much indebted to him. And of course we're also fortunate to have rubbed shoulders with Bryan McMahon, with people like John B. Keane and Brendan Kennelly that we had here Friday night. We're just so lucky that in our lifetime in North Kerry that we've come across all these people, that we have interacted with them, that they have influenced us. We don't realise it, and maybe at times we may take it a bit for granted. But as you grow older, you realise more and more of how lucky we are really that we have had these people to, I suppose, admire and to be influenced by during our grown-up period. So Joe is going to take the events here this evening. I think Joe is suitably qualified to do a very, very good job. So I will introduce you now to Joe Murphy. Thank you very much.
I'll vote for you the next time also.
Thank you very much.
Fáilte ród go Finuge agus go Céirí Huig. Agus fáilte ród go léir chuig an comóra seo, mar a comóra atá an. Tá méid ag comóra Bryan McMahon, a trí bhean, a séthar litirthe, a carda agus a clán. We're celebrating Bryan McMahon in various ways, through his literary, wonderful literary achievements, of course, through his friends, and even through his family. And it is indeed appropriate, of course, that we celebrate Bryan McMahon at this particular festival, because, as you know, Bryan was the master and Sean was the pupil, going way back in time. So it is obvious from what Sean achieved in his life as a balladeer and a storyteller that Bryan helped him to shove back those brown curtains that we all read about in school and exposed him to the windows of wonder. Two or three points that I would like to make about Bryan before anybody speaks, and that is a few of the qualities that struck me about him. And the first one was a quality which is very rare in all generations, but particularly rare in ours, and that is raibh úslucht agus mairgeacht an léin ag bint leis. So sean tré é sin, agus ní bhain sé le saoil na seo in éair. in pain. The other thing I would say about him, that Cadrub Dain, our human communication, was a great trait of his also, as I know particularly since I reside temporarily in the square and have been doing so for the last 7 or 8 years, and the great social interaction he had with people in the town of Listowel. The other thing about him, of course, was the búna scéalaíochta agus búna saolaíochta goládaran. The gift of storytelling and the gift of the imagination. And one of his great philosophies in life, which was indicative of a very creative man, of course, was a very basic philosophy, and what he used to say was, lá ida agus job ila déanta, another day and another job done. So he figured that if when you were reclining for the night, if you could say, I have something achieved today, life was worth living, and you were being creative and having a fulfilling life yourself. We begin, our first item tonight will be a video, and it is actually the last interview with Bryan McMahon, and it was compared by Nora Rilhan, and it was shot in the Listowel Arms Hotel a few years ago. So that is our first item this evening. In November of
4 weeks before he died.
4 weeks before he died, in November 97.
Since we are sitting in the home of Dr. Bryan McMahon of Listowel, who is one of the town's most famous writers. And Bryan, you are many things more than a writer. Tell me, what did you do earlier on in your life?
I played handball, I played hurling, I fished, I followed hounds to some extent, I hunted with the boys and the beagles, I did many things. I suppose you could call me a jack of all trades and a master of none, but we'll see.
Oh, we're talking about master now. That leads on to something else. You were a particular master, weren't you?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
45 years I was schoolmaster. Yes, it passed like a dream now. I'm 22 years and retired now. And the time I was schoolmaster seems a lovely dream that I had one time. My pupils keep turning up from all parts, you know, but they've grown up from so-so to so-so. There was one at the door a while ago, but I couldn't see because I was engaged otherwise. But it is a very pleasant thing to look back on. That's the way I was.
And then you started, when did you start to write?
Oh, I was always writing. I was always writing. Since I was a child I was writing, but nevertheless, I didn't put it on an unsuspecting public until about, let me see, about 44 or 45 that time. Yes, I started writing stories. I think a lot of us or Progress to the Bed, which was started by Charles Whalen and Frank O'Connor, and Morris Walsh was in it, and a whole lot of people like that. During the war, they were pushed back to Ireland. And they said, we'll do something, and they did a very valuable thing in the belt. They welcomed us all in the belt to let Irish life speak for itself.
We always associate you particularly with the short story.
Yes, I've done all kinds of things, from plays and ballads and poems and bookmarks and everything like that, but the short story is the thing.
So you're an acknowledged craftsman and a master of the short story.
I taught in the greatest centre probably in the world, in the State University of Iowa. Taught there under the great masters. I was there with some of the great masters of story in America. Travelled down through the southern states.
Such as, give us some of the names.
Oh, Vance Burcheli is one I known. I forget him now, but there was an Irishman there. I was in. Everybody who was ever in Texas or Harvard mentions it in the first sentence, but I was in one of those two places and I got a phone call one morning, and it came in Irish. And so said Ian McMahon is me. Sorry to finish Tommy on shot. And if I like to talk to Iowa, would you like to come to Iowa? Kan we morgen zijn daarom na een rudder gummen til dolga Iowa. So I went to Iowa. This man, he was a chairman who wrote a book afterwards, Murray.
I was cultural Minnick.
So I went back there again, and from that, this was a great centre for the short story, and he had brought people from all over the world, symphonies from all nations there, to teach them literature. And some of them made millions. While I was there was a young fellow came from the East, and he made $70,000 with his first book. He was extraordinary. They all went on their right way there, I taught them. And then I came home and I brought this to the Writers' Week, which you know.
That's
I brought
right.
the short story.
That was 1971, yes.
Workshop, yeah.
And you directed that for many years.
I did, and then it took up all over Ireland, and it took up in different forms, and so it just come to
So actually you introduced the writers' workshops into Ireland.
I introduced the workshop to business to Ireland, yes,
You did.
definitely.
You did, yes. So now you are spending what you might describe as your retirement. I mean, I know you've had many honours in your life. Would you like to tell us about some of the ways you've been honoured, Brian? You've had lots of
Well, I'll tell you, very simple. I get a letter from Japan that they're doing my stories in the University of Tokyo. I get a letter from the Ukraine, said they wanted my anthology. Penguin wrote last week for one of my stories in some American anthology. It goes on all the time. We get people whom, as particular stories strikes them, they're a target, it strikes them. And they write to me from all parts, they tell me their reaction, and they tell me something about myself that I never experienced before. They put it in words. And that's a delightful experience.
They read behind your lines, do
They
they?
do, and they read my subconscious,
Yeah.
which is very warm. Sometimes they're all wrong, of course, but sometimes they're deadly right.
Yeah.
This is something that pleases me.
And of course the Abbey Theatre, our National Theatre, has acknowledged your expertise as a dramatist also, hasn't
I
it?
don't know.
As well as very many other groups
Yes, of
in
course.
Ireland and abroad.
It's been a vivid life. I must look back on a very vivid life. I tried a whole lot of things. I'm at the moment now, if you ask me now what I'm writing, I won't tell you because I'm Finuge, I'm a Finuge.
Yes.
I don't like people who talk masterpieces, people who write. And never forget, the worst pencil is better than the best memory. That's an old statement, everything.
Yeah.
But I'm trying something new now in my declining years. And maybe it's a mirage, maybe it's a delusion, maybe I'm doting. Although a friend of mine, when I said to her, I'm doting, she says, I'm the first one to tell you if you're not. Don't ever make a mistake. I'll tell you if you're doting.
Bryan McMahon there in conversation with Norwell in November of '97. And of course, as this is a celebration and a commemoration of Brian, ní húna go mé gon an brón agus an tuignas agus an áthas fitte fúti le céile ann. It is no wonder that there will be elements of sadness and loneliness, I suppose, but also happiness in this, because as Brian said there himself, he had a very fulfilling life, a very creative life, and as we know, he was creative right to the very end, and his final work was the final fling, which he was keeping secret at that particular interview. And each time I can glecher a caradílis agus corsa bell doris de bhríon shesin éman omar a cú ó Shrad na Courtyard Bohar tap na Courtyard Stone, éman omar a cú from the Courthouse Road Stone, who was a loyal friend and a neighbour of Brian's. He's going to speak of certain aspects of some of Brian's writings. Éman omar a cú.
Your Excellency, family of Brian, people of Listowel and Finuge, distinguished guests, and indeed, as Brian himself would say, a choid a liam. Is mór an cúis áthis agus lu choirid doing a goléir, bheithan seo hanacht an ihes bloidrach seo. A ceiliúr a cuimhne, saothar agus saol, bhríon mac machuna. How appropriate it is this evening that a local community joins with visitors and distinguished guests so Hían so Congar to celebrate the life and work of a man that we all love. Now, what I hope to do here this evening in the brief time that I have is, through some of Brian's own musings and writings, refer to some aspects, some few aspects, of the very rich legacy that he has left us all. Brian was a man with rare dignity, superb intellect, of international fame, and yet an ordinary man that spent his lifetime among the people he loved, celebrating the richness of life that he encountered in his native North Kerry. He was an extraordinary man, equally at home in the world of university academia abroad, as he was when walking his beloved square in his native Listowel. He was so special, recognised and admired for his love of learning, language, literature and people. Master and storyman, master of the imagination and of storied Listowel. When one asked Bryan, "Conas Thontu," he invariably replied, "Marim, Marim Fos, I live yet." And Bryan, the moulder of minds, the sculptor of words, the carpenter of song, lives on through his writing and his inspirational example as teacher and friend. Trína scríbhní mar an larga loibhe, trína bhúnsáireacht mar an tionchar iontaine agus a dhealsúnachta, agus trína charadas linn mar an grá doscailte, a nasc an baile Listowel, muintir an bhaile agus an cheantar hart agus brín him. And through his writings, and through our memories of him, we continue to be extended, enriched and energized. He was, of course, to all who knew him personally, an anam chara, a soul friend in the very real sense of the word. For me, Bryan was a person first, with the gifts of ink, of eloquence, of teaching and friendship, who through those gifts shared the experiences of life, its hopes, its dreams, its fears, and who enjoyed people, and who cared for and respected their most precious possessions, their thoughts. And all that Bryan did was laced with that inevitable trace of Kerry humour. Let me give you an example. I always enjoyed watching Bryan as teacher, as actor, as friend, the way he would start anything, and the way that he would capture the attention of all. And I remember when I invited him to give a lecture in Dublin in September 1983, about he warning the people present that he wasn't going to speak too long, because one should not speak too long, he said, on an important subject. And he gave this as the reason. This isn't the storyman, incident. There are 56 words, he said, in the Lord's Prayer. There are 297 words in the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue. There are 300 words in the United States Declaration of Independence. And there are 26,911 words in a recent EEC directive on the presentation and sale of duck eggs. Bryan's lifeblood was books. He said to the book lover, and that is one who is in love with books, the smell of fresh print can be as exciting as the smell of brandy to an alcoholic. Seated there without an audience, he is utterly himself, as is a woman dreaming herself back and forth from her image in a mirror to her reality in the flesh. And he says the book can take many forms. And in The Storyman, he writes of the 1,000 roles of a book in exquisite expressive language. And halfway through that extraordinary list, he says, books are about every possible activity of the spirit, mind and body. And Bryan wrote and talked and discussed quite often what he regarded as the three main hungers: hunger of the spirit, hunger of the body, and hunger of the mind. And in the context of books, he said, there is a hunger of the spirit for what lies beyond, and a hunger of the body to which mankind must respond. But beneath the gentle lamplight, with word and image twined, a book shall serve to banish the hunger of the mind. When Bryan was a young boy, a simple remark by a fisherman on the west coast of Kerry opened up for him some of the great wonders of the world in one single sentence. Is a Malian Duni in a Vishe, is since the Deaga of Brian. Bryan was about 12 years old, and he went out fishing off Corcagine with this fisherman. And the fisherman held up a mackerel. I remember he telling us this story in 3rd class. And the fisherman said, "Isn't it extraordinary that the Almighty God never created any two mackerel with the same pattern on their skins?" This, Bryan maintained, is the essence of uniqueness and individuality. And he went on, that he lavished care on the pattern of each individual fish in the sea, each individual grain of sand, each individual blade of grass, each individual noseprint of a hound, each individual fingerprint of a human being. So no two people are created alike, he said. And Bryan said that that simple statement was fundamental to his attitude to life. that it is a privilege to meet and engage with a person who has never been created before and will never be created again. It is in this context that Bryan maintained that the good teacher, the good parent, the good friend, the good neighbour engages with all people, especially those in impressionable years. And for many of us in Listowel, the engagement with Bryan in the classroom at 8 years of age has left an indelible legacy. That simple statement by the fisherman, according to Bryan, is what the writer celebrates and the teacher cultivates. And I'm very tempted at this stage to bring you into third class as I experienced it, 45 years ago. But we're going to do better still. We're going to see Bryan in a piece of video compiled by John Lynch, acting in his own imitable style, his own magical style, in the classroom.
We christened it the Lantigue, which has no connotations whatsoever with theatre, but it is a legendary name in the southwest of Ireland and known to railway enthusiasts all over the world, because the Lantigue was the name given to the world's first monorail railway, which travelled between Listowel and Ballybunion at the beginning of this century. 31st of May 1972, with Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, and for all of us at least, the waiting was over, and Godot certainly did arrive.
Sows a crop and he reaps it again in the harvest. He has something to show for his labour. The architect plans a bridge and there it is, something he can lay his hands on. But after a lifetime of effort, the teacher who deals with ideas, words, concepts, has nothing material to show for his time, and yet the fruit of his labour must be somewhere. But if teaching is an exacting trade, it is also an exciting one. For he cannot help catching the infectious enthusiasm of the children before him, each finding the new world for himself, finding eternal verities in stories, the story of Midas with a golden touch, or of Alice in Wonderland, and the story of Basheen in Tir na nÓg. The story of the young Christ in the temple confounding the doctors of the law. I remember once asking a boy what imagination was. He paused for a while and his companions tried to answer. One said it is a dream world. Another said it's something you make up that isn't there at all. But the boy who had been silent suddenly said, imagination is your eye looking in instead of out, and that's as fine a definition as you can find. Of course it is necessary to look out onto a world that is full of sunlight or is suddenly filled with the dusk of evening. But it is good also to look inward and find sustenance in the fields of the imagination. So the good teacher, I think, must be an actor if he is to hold the attention of children for a long, weary day. And teaching, like acting, gets into the blood, and both should be animated by the imagination, which perhaps is the keynote of Writers' Week which lies before us.
Bryan McMahon was one of the co-founders of Writers' Week. One of those visionaries who reminded us that we are children of the rainbow, dwelling always in the morning of the world.
We have lecturemen and playwrights fair, some of great renown. Bryan McMahon and...
Absolutely wonderful. Incidentally, while watching that, I was walking along the beach last Sunday, and believe it or not, I was thinking of Bryan's right hand. How many times did he characteristically, when talking to us, do that? When he would see us coming up the street, he would stop and he'd do that. And that was an indication that he was delighted to see you. And his first question, of course, was Ian Scale. And then the story man was off. And that video there reminded me of so many times in the classroom when he got us to reach for the highest possible heights. And so characteristic as a teacher, do that. Wonderful. However, let's carry on. Bryan was an acute observer of people in all their diversity. But in that diversity, he continued to search for what I would call the commonality. And later we're going to be treated with some very nice excerpts from the Honey Spike, what is probably the definitive work on the travelling people. When I was in the United States in 1971, I came across an article by Bryan called A Portrait of Tinkers, which was published in the American magazine Natural History. And it concluded as follows. As I view him, the tinker on the Irish roads, I've avoided the word itinerant as much as possible, as I reckon it one of false elegance, is one of the outer ramparts of individual liberty. He continues to vouch for the wit, the resourcefulness and the versatility of man, since every dawn brings him the problem of accumulating enough food to be alive at sunset. And just as the writer of fiction at times tests the vaguely defined area on the edges of consciousness and sanity, so also in the life of the tinker, there is that which tests the edge of physical living. To some extent, he exemplifies what man can endure under conditions of extreme hostility. Mankind, he says, has as many layers as an onion, and when all these layers are peeled off, the core is tinker or gypsy. The traveller is in me, in you, in every man. Yet compared with the tinker, we are lapdogs by the parlour fireside, quivering in commingled fear and ecstasy, when through the sound of the gusting storm outside, we hear the baying of wild dogs running free by the light of the moon. That Ireland is going, but Bryan's Ireland was not an old Ireland, or a forgotten Ireland. It was very much of a modern Ireland. And indeed in his book, Here's Ireland, he refers to modern Ireland as historical Ireland, geographical Ireland, teenage Ireland, vanished Ireland, religious Ireland, literary Ireland, sporting and athletic Ireland, urban or industrial Ireland, rural or agricultural Ireland, divided Ireland, festival Ireland, sober Ireland, tipsy Ireland, television Ireland. They're all here, he said, and we shall see their faces as we go round the land. And go around the land he did, and he loved travelling, and he was known and loved in every county in our country. And we have a man here this evening with us tonight, Eamon Kelly, who travelled the land with him. And only the other night, I came across this excerpt, which I must read today, the day that's in it, of Eamon Kelly, Paddy Tunney, and Bryan, travelling from the Stole to Donegal. Incidentally, it took them 3 days to get there. And on the Sunday, they were in Galway, after a meal in the local hotel, and I'll read on. This is written by Paddy Tunney. On Sunday morning, after an early mass in the Augustinian church, we hit the road for Tuam, where the last of the High Kings of Ireland, Rory O'Connor, had reigned. After lunch in the town, it was evident that McMahon was ill at ease, and as 3:30 p.m. approached, he got steadily worse. A malady akin to the affliction Rister Cuchulainn had overtaken him. The Sunday before, Kerry could only draw with Clare at the Tralee venue, and the replay was fixed for Ennis on this very day. The sight of a wireless pole aggravated his condition. We had no watch, but there was a clock of sorts on my prefect car. It registered 3:25 p.m. Stop, Bryan shouted. There's a wireless pole in that house. I pulled up and we beelined for the open door. Come on in, the man at the house invited us. The game is about to start. The whistle was blown, the ball thrown in, and Kerry went away like the wind. They clapped up 3 quick points without reply. Bryan began to breathe freely again. The pallor left his cheeks and his eyeballs ceased rolling. Eamon leant over to me. He's coming round, I think he will. Cara young and that clear, cara an specialta is ban realta an tour Tressa. And she asked Bryan some time ago to send her on the old Kerry footballer, and again the day that's in it, I'll just read 2 verses. Oh, that was the time surely, I was stalwart and strong and tall, as clad in a Kerry ganzy I leapt for the flying ball. For that was the time when if still seemed my heart and hand, and my name was lit by thousands to the ends of our land. We stripped off by frozen ditches in the dark of winter time, till we glittered like bacon flitches with the snow and the rime. And we played upon boggy hillsides against a gale from north and west, for we cherished but one ambition, to prove Kerry was best. Aye, and we treasured our ancient language, is gone noire the Laurimer E, where the higgamer nart the duchish is spread is na farve V. They maybe made jokes at our accents, let them laugh and guffaw once again, but we proved when the fray was fiercest that Kerry bred men. Time is running out, so the same as Bryan, we have to return to the Listowel, because Bryan was and always will be Kerry, North Kerry and Listowel. He regarded Listowel as the university of the ordinary people, and there was nothing he delighted more in than the faculty of rhetoric in the university of the people. He said of his town, friendship in a small community is of the essence. People with whom you feel fully at home, who by intuition can sense your various mood swings and you theirs, and make allowance therefore. This is an absolute necessity for those who live in a small town. And for me at this time, among the most poignant words that Bryan wrote are the following excerpts that he wrote when a great friend of his died many, many years ago. A man that he loved to talk about up to the end, the late Tim Cotter from Listowel. They're poignant now because Bryan's grief for his friend resonates with our sense of loss in the passing of Bryan. They're very beautiful words, and I'll read them. One by one they leave us, those who had almost seen that if God, after he had made them and smiled and seen they were unique, had then decided to break the mold that gave them shape. Perhaps it is that, although he was unlike anybody, he was like everybody, and that there was so much of us in him and so much of him in us that we are unable to treat of him objectively. He was all that was vital in our beings being reduced to a healthy essence. He was one with our river flowing, our painted shops and our horse racing. He was the philomath lingering after the age of philomaths has gone. He was the partisan par excellence, the footballer fielding and the natural equal of any emergency. He was the play, the mime, the recitation, the song, the contradiction that called up echoes from chasms deep in us. His was the delight of words placed in their adorable order, and his was the unfettered and unfetterable heart. Those who knew him require no touchstone to recall him. Those who did not know him can never have him explained to them. Before we go, and this will be my final comment, we cannot leave Finuge without referring to Bryan the ballad maker. He wrote in 1942 in the Bell, "Now I'll have you know I was suckled on balladry. In a market and fair town like ours, ballads come straight from the heart of things, and they have a habit of issuing loudly from the warm maws of pubs." And I'll just read a brief, he wrote a most beautiful piece in December 1942 in the Bell about his writing the town of Listowel. It's a beautiful piece and resonates with humour and love for his town and so on. And I'll just read 2 very brief pieces from it, if I may. He said, "For long I had been troubled by the contemplation that many of the towns and villages of Ireland had had verses composed in their honour, while I could discover ne'er a quatrain in the praise of my native place, Listowel. This omission I determined to rectify with the smallest possible delay. The first thing I did was to examine the town's conscience, and with a sigh had to concede that its credit balance consisted merely of an annual race meeting and a river full of fish. Naturally, I concluded that the race meeting was a meteor subject for the as yet embryonic ballad than the fishful field. Beside, the race days were approaching." And he continues, and listen to this, he says, "Collating my observations on the ballad, I came to the conclusion that the signs of the true ballad were as follows. First, a familiar subject expressed with a disconcerting, a disarming, at times even a brutal directness. Second, a merry procession with now and again 2 syllables jockeying for the one note, ending up by having it. Next, a shooting of words and their primary meanings. Words not exactly striking the bull's-eye of meaning, but which are intimidated by the whine of the ricochets. Lastly, in a way somewhat septuagint larceny, bathos on a tremendous scale. And he continues on, and he concludes at the end of the article, incidentally, that, I'll just find it, and these will be the last few lines, and he concludes the article by saying, just one more confession, and I have finished the story of my ballad. Heaven forgive me, I plugged it. You see, in the rather extended intervals when I'm not engaged in this lucrative business of writing ballads, I'm a schoolmaster. That, of course, placed me in the happy position of ensuring that fair or foul, my ballad should live. Thus, if I had an odd few minutes in the day at school, I unleashed the youngsters at the song, and since it was local, they lapped it up and loved it. We still lap it up, we still love it, and here to sing it for us is Pádraig Kelly. Good evening, Mahal.
May be famous and Galway be grand, and the praise of Tramore echo down through the land. But I'll sing you a ballad of beauty extol, as I found it long ago in the town of Listowel. Tooraloo, tooralay, as I found it long ago in the town of Listowel. There were bookies and bagmen and bankers and all. Biddy Mulligan was there with a green-coloured shawl, and a cute little kid pitching pence in a bowl took me down for a crown in the town of Listowel. Tooraloo, tooralay, took me down for a crown in the town of Listowel. Across on the course there was silk flashing past. The unfortunate nag that I backed, he was last. When he ran the wrong way, sure I lost my control, and I prayed for the trainer in lovely Listowel. Tooraloo, tooralay, and I prayed for the trainer in lovely Listowel. Oh, night time, how are you? The night sure 'twas day, and the stars in the sky, they looked down in dismay, and they says to the moon in accent so droll, you're done for the sun shines tonight on Listowel. Tooraloo, tooralay, you're done for the sun shines tonight on Listowel. Now my rhyming is over, God bless all who heard, and I'll take to the roads and go off like a bird. But before I will go, you must all pay toll, so 3 cheers for the races in lovely Listowel. So 3 cheers for the races and lovely Listowel.
We're reading about Éamon for that wonderful and elevating insight into some of Brian's writings and musings. He was ably assisted there with the piece of video shot by John Lynch years back on the occasion of Brian's retirement from school, and also by the singing of Pádraig Kelly and the consummate playing of Mr. Colin Stride O'Brien. Our next extract or contribution will be from one of Brian's best known plays, already mentioned by Éamon, that is The Honey Spike. And just to set the scene for you briefly, Martin Claffey and Breathe Claffey are coming from the Giant's Causeway to the hospital in Kenmare because Breathe wants to have her baby in the hospital. On the way, unfortunately, they come by Killarglin, affectionately known as Puck Fair, or as Puck to some of us, and as happens at Puck Fair, the drink got the better of Martin Claffey. He forgot about his wife's confinement, and she's left more or less to battle on her own to make it to Kenmare. However, she's lucky enough to pick up one of her relations, and that is Dickie Bird. Dickie Bird now would be known as a thimble rigger, a fan American, or a three-card trick man. A bit of a trickster generally anyway, but the humanity comes out in Dickie Bird, and he decides to accompany her to the hospital in Kilmare. And that's where, that is the extract that we're going to have. They're sitting in the sidecar, Dickie Bird and Breathe. The extract is brought to you courtesy of the Listowel Drama Group, which, as you know, Bryan helped to found many years ago, and it features Bryan's son, his youngest son, Owen McMahon, and Ursula Carmody. Thank you.
Easy now, child, easy, child. Easy, child, I mind you, I'll get you to your honey spike, child. Watch yourself now and step onto my spring cap there, little. You're all right, child. We'll get out of puck now before the night is out. Sit down there in my spring cat, and I'll get you. Now we have the three curses of the Irish people. We have a long road, a lazy ass, and a contrary woman. I have the cure for 'em, a good ash plant. Go on there, get up, get up, get up. Go on.
Dickie Bird?
What, child?
Are you mad?
Mad child? Mad child? I'm stone mad, child.
Were you ever always mad, Dickie Bird?
No, not always, child.
What made you mad?
A woman and three fools.
I don't understand, Dickie Bird.
The woman I married had 3 children, 1, 2, and 3. Before the 4th arrived, I ran away.
You never went back?
No, I never went back.
What happened then?
Their eyes are before me always. Aye, their screeching drives me mad. Eyes and ties I see before me all day long. It's their way of getting their own back in me.
With me you aren't mad at all.
No, child, I'm all right when there's only 2 there. But more drives me astray. The pain in your head, is it all right, love?
It'll pass.
Go on.
Give him the whip, Dickie.
Go on, get up there.
Dickie Bird?
What, child?
Will they put us off the roads altogether and take our children from us?
Aye, we're maybe the last to be free.
Where was I born, Dickie Bird?
In a village north of Lynch in the County Clare.
Papa was right, son. What age does that leave me?
17 and a bit.
Where was I christened, Dickie Bird?
Oh, you were christened at the Naked Church of Doolin. Aye.
The priest that baptised me, had he red eyes?
Aye, he had red eyes. And the roofs of the houses there have flags of stone. I was sitting by the road and your father came along. Tramper, can you say the creed? Only for I standing for Udin, I wouldn't be here tonight.
What class of a babby was I, Dickie Bird?
Come back here, Sissy, and wet the babby's head. I drank port wine, and that night I went up to the top of the moor cliffs. Winds of eternity, I shouted. Tell your boss I was acting for him. I got a mad scare, you laughing then, I did.
Are we near the top of the pass?
We're reaching the top now. We won't be a while going down, Olaf.
We won't be a minute going down.
No, take it. No, you're all right. I'll get you there, all right.
Dickie Bird?
What, child, what?
Is there life after this one, like the priest tell us?
Things here tell of a finer beauty in a life to come.
You believe it so?
I do. We know where we are, but we don't know where we're going.
Dickie Bird, what matters most in life?
What matters? Cock and hen, bull and cow, stallion and mare, man and woman. When you were born, God put a note into your fist.
What did my note read?
Pass life along.
Is that all?
Isn't it enough? Mate, give birth and die. That's your message. Aye, it's enough. That's your message. Go on there. Go on.
Pull up the cob.
We. What is it now?
Just they and Martin and me made our first camp. Drive on.
All right. Go on. Go on. Whoa, boy, whoa. Come on now. We're here. Wake up, child. We have reached Duncan.
Here's the honey spike.
You're here to honey spike. I told you I'd get you there. Mind yourself now.
Bryan McMahon there in extract from the honey spike, and indeed in that we can see both the humour and the humanity of which was so much part of Bryan's writing. Now our next contributor might well be the red-haired Mary referred to in Sean McCafferty's famous ballad. But one thing I can tell you about this red-haired Mary, this particular one here tonight, is she never slept in Murphy's shed. Not yet, anyway. I'm referring, of course, to Francis Kennedy from County Clare, who had the wisdom to cross the Shannon and reside splendidly in the Greenville area of Listowel. Francis is going to give a recitation from Bryan, What the Tinker Woman Said, and she's also going to sing a song of Bryan's, My Fort Greenfield. Francis Kennedy. Thank you.
Good evening. My memory of Bryan is Bryan as he walked around the streets of Listowel. He was available to everybody. He'd stop and talk to everybody he met. And one evening he met an immigrant from the county of Cork, not from Clare, the county of Cork. And we spoke about different things. And I brought down about this recitation, What the Tinker Woman Said to Me. And I was very taken with the first line of it. Oh, may Jesus relieve you nor have just halt my lovely man. I thought it was beautiful language, and I said, where did he get the inspiration for it? And he explained how that everybody have a story. Every person has a story. And this was the sad and mournful tale that this tinker woman had. And we were standing outside Lynch's in the square, and he said, look across the road there now at St. John's, he said. There used to be railings outside that, he said. And there was a tinker woman tying up her ass to that. And I crossed over the square, and she asked me for a few coppers. And he said, I gave her whatever few bob that was in my pocket. And she said, oh, may Jesus relieve you nor have just halt my lovely man. So he said she only told her tale of woe once to him, but he wrote it down. And this is how it goes. Oh, may Jesus relieve you nor have just halt my lovely man. Like myself were, black hair, brown eyes, and yellow skin. That's your beauty and my beauty. It's the trademark of the wards. Buried above here I'll be, right opposite the yew tree. First turn to the right, first turn to the left, 20, maybe 30 paces. Halt! Black Bridgie Ward. I love you, sir. I love you for your hair, your eyes, your skin. It's in 4 of me grandsons. I got 4 after myself, and 4 after their foxy father. Oh, I can't stick foxy people. As sure as Christ was nailed, sir, I suffered my share. Ah, indeed I did, sir, but I have my help. Over in Ballyhige I am, and mother, sir, did I maybe saint to Almighty God? I starts thinking of my son Timothy. Tygeen, we calls him. That's in the sanatorium above here. And the minute I starts thinking of him, a battering ramser couldn't come between me and my lovely boy. I set into my daughter's car, sir, and I travelled 14 Irish mile of ground. I went in above, sir. Hello, Master, he laughing. He's my son, sir, my lawful godson. Oh, the heart rose up in me, but I held it back. Oh, yes, says I, and isn't it full of fun anywhere? Where be now, Mass, says he? In Ballyhige, says I. I've my daughter's daughter with me. You're a bit of a child, Jean, barely beginning to walk. Cuckoo, says he. Gaming for the benefit of the child was catch shy. At that we commenced laughing. You're a godfather, Teddy, says I. Oh, no, honest to yourself. Bridgie, your sister, had 2 more since who left. That's his sister's children, sir. With that he fell to laughing, on account of he me a godfather. What launched him? It's a mother, sir. I'll tell you no word of a lie. I left him there, sir, standing at the window, had vanished in his disease, and we taken to the road. Easter Saturday that was, sir. I reached up my hand in his direction, sir, as I sat into my daughter's green car. He stood there till we rounded the gate post. I'll tell you no word of a lie, sir. At Christmas, we were up in Newtown. Now we were all drinking. I'll hold nothing back. Christmas it is, I said, and no tidy. Came to St. Patrick's Day. And in the middle of my carousing, I stopped and I said, Patrick's Day and no Timothy. He stole races and no Timothy. Standing at the window he was, black hair, brown eyes and yellow skin, Teddy Ward. Buried above here he'll be, right opposite the oak tree. First on to the right, first on to the left. 20, maybe 30 paces. Halt! Black Teddy Ward. Thank you. After Bryan telling me about this tinker woman and her tale, he looked at me and he said, do you know, she was a fine, big ball of a woman like herself, if you don't mind me saying so. So I knew, well, he definitely did not need spectacles. I heard this on my fourth green field from the singing of Donncha O'Leary from West Cork. And I was singing it for a good many years before I actually realised that it was Bryan McMahon that wrote it. One morning near Black Valley on the Kerry Hills I strayed. I heard a woman moaning in a holding by the road. She was all but queenly beautiful, with grief her brow sealed. She made her lamentations for her fort green field. I stayed my step beside her, and these to her says I, oh, are you Helen fair of Troy, descended from the sky? My name is Courtney Houlihan, she then to me did say, and I knew her as the honour of the Fort Greenfield. The stranger came one day, she said, he thought me all alone. My eldest son, he drew the sword, his name it was Wolf Tone. The grief I suffered as he fell has never truly healed, for his blood bedewed the grass of my Fort When I was young, this woman said, I had lovers by my side. I had PHPs and Connolly and Major John McBride. I'd Clark and Brave MacDonagh and more who'd never yield. How can I bear the loss of you, my Fort Greenfield? I gazed across the Kerry hills through air like the morning wine. I looked upon this woman whose spirit kindled mine. There's men in Ireland still, I said, who would don the shield for thee. Before the face of God, they will win for you your Fort Greenfield. I stumbled down the mountainside, gazed on the plain below. High on the hill Athena hung, all wrecked in grief and woe. I cannot rest, nor can I sleep, with grief my brow is sealed, since I heard that woman mourning for her Fort Greenfield. Thank you.
Originally from County Cork. Now, when I was young, that I'd grown up in the 70s, I must confess that I did some growing in the 60s also, and a slight amount of it in the 50s. There was no better way to get back to reality and overcome the frivolity of a night in Ballybunnan. The way for us to do it was to join the creamery queue in Lizelton, and after about half an hour or so of engaging in high debate in the poor man's parliament, I can assure you that you'd have forgotten all your romantic musings of the night before. But it wasn't all doom and gloom, because there were certain compensations for the drudgery of going to the creamery. And one such compensation was that you might get a chance to view one of the local beauties of the area. And one such local beauty at the time, and still is, I'm delighted to say, was Chrissy Nolan. Now, Chrissy is going to do a few readings for you now from Patsy-O, the series of children's stories that Bryan wrote, and also from The Master. So let's have Chrissy Nolan. Thank you.
Excellency, agus a cháirde go léir, cháirde illig. It's a great privilege to be here this evening to pay tribute to this wonderful man that we call Bryan McMahon. Is so cháird bhórí agus is privilege all bhór a bheith an seo ag cilúra chuinecháin ar gara agus ar léach uasal brian. Got a fada bhóna ins na síriach. Now, I can get my own back on Jimmy Deanahan this evening. Jimmy always says, I'm in the presence of Mary to realise that. Mary doesn't mind. Jimmy always says that when he is invited to occasions in Lizelton, and at which I preside, he gets into such a state of excitement that he scarce knows where he is. So this evening I was invited here by Jimmy, and I got into such a state of excitement because I would be in such close proximity to Jimmy that I forgot my glasses. Never before did I forget my glasses, and I've been wearing them for the past 2 years, my reading glasses. So these are Eamon Kelly's glasses. So the man who can give tongue to the stones, these are Eamon's, and I will try to give something to my eyes. I hope they will give a tongue to my eyes now, so I'll just pray for that. So, and my mother is here in the audience as well, and Bryan, you sometimes say to her, in the last couple of years, you know, I might well be your son-in-law yet. So, I just say that. He used to say that I was very fond of Bryan. He was a great pal, a great friend, and he was an extraordinary human being. To have been a young teacher at the time that Bryan was in the prime of his life was like a little stardust held, a fragment of the rainbow cut. Words cannot describe his influence. It was full of light and colour. Bryan was always supportive, challenging and affirming. And I will tell this little story because I think the reality and the imagery is very well known to us. In a school that I was visiting one day, the teacher said, there was this little lad, and she said, come up and tell us what happened to your mother the other day. So the child came forward and in great innocence said, the other day my mother went down to put out the clothes in the line at the bottom of the garden, and she went bogging. And you all know what bogging is, living in a place like this, especially over the last couple of days. And the mother said, I was very upset because I went down very far. So the teacher then said to the little young fellow, well, how far did she go down? To Daxel, ma'am. The reason I'm saying that is that Bryan McMahon went to Daxel in his efforts to bring inspiration, reality, and a sense of the sublime to this wonderful experience that we call life. And he never spared himself. So there is no knowing the influence that he had on all of us young people, and especially young teachers. So I've chosen to read 3 pieces from his book, The Master, because first and foremost he was a master. He was a teacher, and I think it's because we have that affinity. There's a lovely old saying, and it says, "Is buan dinne in a goig fein." Each person is strongest in their own locality, in their own place. So I will say this little piece from what he would consider to be the characteristics of a good teacher. Dedication is a prime requisite, as is the gift of infectious enthusiasm. A love of learning is most desirable in the good teacher. Versatility of approach to a lesson is important. Nothing stultifies children more than their ability to predict day after day how their teacher will approach a certain subject. I mention the importance of the cultivation of a sense of wonder when applied to the minor epiphanies of the passing day. But I repeat that routine must have its place, for verbal or even physical buck jumping on the teacher's part often leads to bewilderment and mockery. In my deep-rooted opinion, the teacher should, above all, act in harmony with the traditions and culture of the school area. Change in many aspects of life is inevitable, or life calcifies and dies. But change, if it is desirable, should be brought about through the patient process of grafting, rather than that of uprooting the known and replacing it with the unknown. Finally, under this heading, a teacher in class should learn to pace his energy and maintain economy of effort. The generation of older teachers whom I knew as a young man were proud of their erudition. I recall one of these saying, "I am a philomath," a lover of learning. The man spoke with a deep sense of pride. Nor did Latin and Greek come amiss to him and to many of his colleagues, which brings to mind an incident that happened to me in the local harness maker's shop. A priest entered. Laughingly, I had occasion to use a Latin tag, to which he responded in kind. He left the shop, and then a school teacher entered. He and I conversed in Irish. After he had left, an old traveller friend of mine came in, and under breath we carried on a desultory conversation in Shelta, the traveller's language. During these proceedings, the harness maker, a lovable character, remained silent. When he and I were alone, he looked out the window and said dryly, "The priests have Latin, the schoolmasters have Irish, the travellers have gammon. 'Tis only ignoramuses like myself now speaks English." And for the next piece, I will just take a section, page 116, and this has to do with Brian's thoughts on the media. And there's a lovely Irish saying, it says, "Ceall fisha mahan muintir," without a vision a people perish. And I think we will understand something of what Brian was saying and thinking when he wrote these lines. I personally have no axe to grind with regard to the media. Over the years, I had my fair share of media exposure. But on a couple of rare occasions, I have found it humiliating to be tipped off in advance to avoid breaking into Irish during a programme, something that, as a true bilingual, I have found hard to avoid. I am aware that it would be a breach of good manners to speak in one language, if I knew the interviewer were not proficient in it, but the little anticipatory nudge rankled, especially when I found myself opposite a panel member to whom I had never spoken English. "Don't be incestuous now, yourself and Dex." During the programme was the advice given. I knew what that meant, of course. The power of the media sometimes stupefies me, and the mass mind it condones, which engenders an inability to think for oneself. Television for me is only a shadow of life. When someone on the box discusses the film world, what I see is the electronic feeding on the electronic, in a further step away from reality. Is it to be wondered that at times, like the immured woman of the schoolbook poem, I complain, "I'm half sick of shadows," said the Lady of Shalott. But then I remind myself of the wonderful impressions conveyed by the television screen. To a limited extent, one can vicariously travel the world while sitting in an Irish sitting room. The trouble is to hold on to what is worthy in our own experience and to maintain the dignity this implies. Latterly, I get the overpowering feeling that as a people we are being manipulated. I tend to query everything. The recurrence of an almost exclusively metropolitan panel of commentators, the editorial leaders calculated to diffuse even laudable public indignation, and it seems to me that vested interests, mainly economic, even internationally so, are in unobtrusive control. When a crisis occurs, and that could well cause a little upset in Irish life, I try in advance to name the diffuser. But as soon as my mind gets all worked up on the subject of manipulation, a heckling voice in my brain shouts, "Come to think of it, as a teacher, hasn't your whole life been devoted to manipulation?" So there's Brian with the humorous sting at the tail, you know, it's very, very interesting. And just the last piece is a little piece that talks about changes, and it's quite humorous as well, and it's beautiful. And I will just head it, "Is Buan Bine" again in a Gaelic vein. He was asked, "What changes have you seen in your time?" Changes not only educational, but social, cultural, economic, or whatever. Higgledy-piggledy, let the thoughts come. "I've seen the periwinkle and the pin replaced by the prawn cocktail and the cocktail stick. I've seen the cottage card game of 45 replaced by the poker classic with prizes of £1,000 and the turkey raffle yield place to a national lottery with weekly awards of over £1 million. I've seen an end to the white coffin borne to the cemetery by poorly dressed ex-soldiers holding white ribbons. I've seen children's lunches change dramatically, a bottle of milk and the purple school cocoa replaced by Mars bars, packets of biscuits or crisps and lemonade in tins. I failed dismally," he says, "to keep the school playground free of litter. Annual outings to the seaside on the quaintest railway in the world, the Lartigue, are replaced by holidays in Las Americas or Mykonos. I've seen the breakfast of porridge replaced with a pettish choice of 10 different cereals. Plebeian bacon and cabbage have given way to lasagna verde and quiche Lorraine. I've heard the hello of greeting supplanted by a transatlantic hi. The price of a garden spade I've seen increase 50-fold and more. For the memory of Owen Roe Sullivan, that adorable scamp who fashioned a superb poem out of his asking a blacksmith to make such a spade. I've grown dismal at the cliches of newspaper headings like tug of love and snapshots, a good old word that, of majorettes from Chattanooga doing a soft shoe shuffle at the St. Patrick's Day parade in Ballinabocht. I've seen the rise and fall of Kepler's malt, Harrison's pomade, Zambuk, Monkey brand, Van Houten's cocoa, and magic spot balls. So he goes on, and he talks about, I've seen the cellulite world of Tom Mix and Mary Pickford yield to the lipsticked world of Joan Collins et al. The outlawed ballad has now become a very select vestry psalm. I took a hand in its enthronement. Now I stand by and watch as gradually it becomes fly-blown. I've seen an empire disintegrate before my eyes, and note how its unnatural boundaries leave savage civil wars in its wake. I've seen the fire on the hearthstone replaced by the microwave cooker. For the first 11 years of my life, Ireland was part of an empire, with all the indignities that connoted. I then experienced the first fever of liberty. I now dread the new imperialism of materialism. Its prime weapon, manipulation. In my bones and brain, I am convinced that nothing happens naturally anymore, that everything and everyone is engineered by schemers and conditioned by image, projection, package and presentation. So Shin will about that, and there's a lovely there's a beautiful saying, and that they're Brian's words, you know, Bahat tanga I allowed, Buanu tanga I shkriv. The living thing for a language is to speak it, and to make it last is to write it down. And it says, is boine port na glór na néan, is boine focal na trike an tail. A tune is more lasting than the song of the birds, and a word is more lasting than all the riches of the world. So we have Brian's word for it, the master. Gurmach.
Mil maith an sin Christine mar tú fós go hálan is leis na marrá. Mar a dean sin sin fé scríáir brain bíon rohamór an tíle gáí a casta agus tadan athróir an sail, crun an sail more cracking there mar a déir fa. But none of these things went unnoticed to the writer Brian. Next we have far more Pella agus far more Port agus Ceol. Now we call him Brian's son, Bryan McMahon, who will give a cosmopolitan rendition of some of Brian's compositions, Christiering, the Valley of Finuge and Piper's Hill.
Asáidse a chairlig agus chaide tá ádágas an bit an sort nocht agus bhfuil mo wechas a bhre dus an nadíine gléad rachtáil an íos seo agus go háile Jimmy Dean at no. Your Excellency, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very sincerely on behalf of the McMahon family for your honouring us with your presence here tonight. And I will just give a few maybe personal reminiscences as well as a few songs perhaps of my father. I often think when he made his will about 2 or 3 years ago, it wasn't me that made it, it was another solicitor altogether. But he put into the will, he wrote, Nor a bhíonn an fille fáum, in Gaelic he wrote it, Nor a bhíonn an fille fáum titan an peann as an lá. Buchas le dia, tá an peann am an lá fós, agus an agine glán gap. The what it says in Irish is, when the poet is tired, the pen falls out of his hand. Thank God, he said, I still have the pen in my hand, and my mind clear, crystal clear. So he, up to the last, thank God, he was able to keep writing. And as his housekeeper said to me when I rang her the night he died, well, she said, I'm glad he was not nursing home material. That is true, and we were happy with that.
Yeah.
A few memories of my father, which I have. I remember when I was about 4 years of age, 3 or 4 years of age, he used to go hunting with terriers and greyhounds every Sunday, with Berkey Brown and other people of the town. And Berkey Brown was a butcher, who was a dear friend of his, and the family, I'm glad to say, and happy to say, are dear friends of our family still. He grew up in that house. And Berkey Brown was a butcher. And Berkey Brown would come to the corner in the small square there on a Sunday at about 1 o'clock after an early lunch. And he had a piercing whistle, which he would emit up about 4 streets. And every hound, terrier, Kerry Blue would rush out that door, and he would gather a crowd of the canine species, and they would go off hunting. But my father, when coming back in the evening at 5 o'clock when it was dark, he would always bring in some little bit of nature from the country to me. And even as a 4-year-old, I remember a rabbit's tail, or a tory top, or primroses perhaps in spring, which he would bring to my mother. And that was the first real grasp I had of nature. We lived in the town on the side of the street, so we didn't live in the country. So even before I was allowed out on my own, nature came into the house, and he instilled in me, and I think in all the family, love of nature, which I think is vitally important to pass on to any generation, because I think if you have a love of nature, you stay out of trouble somehow or other. And then fishing, later on, he passed on to me love of fishing, and his beloved river Finuge. And I remember him telling me one time there was a big weir, which I just barely remember, across from the back of the stand into the store, race course. And there was a mill stream there, and when they'd stop, they'd stop the mill, and the fish would be trapped inside in this mill stream. And the salmon, there was a miraculous draft of fishes in those years. And at one stage he told me at about 1920 or 21 that a fella came up to town with an ass rail of salmon. About 45 or 50 salmon inside in this ass rail. And he met some policemen in the way. He says, I caught him fair, sir. He says, I caught him fair. He grew up in a time of lawlessness, and I remember him telling me about the curfew at night, and all the members of the household would have to have their names written in chalk, and at any time the officers of the Black and Tans could come in and check the names on the back of the door. And he said there was one summer, that summer I was talking about in all the summers, that was 1921 I think, and he said it was the finest summer of all time that ever came. And that everybody was in at 9 o'clock. I mean, we wouldn't mind being at 9 o'clock on a night like tonight, but at that time it was bright, of course, until 11 or 11:30. I mentioned the Browns there, and he grew up with the Browns, and in their house and played cards with them. But Patsy Brown and the Browns were all bookmakers, as you know, and are to this day, and I'm glad to see that the 4th generation was taking over Galway races last week, young Berkey. But Patsy Brown, who was his contemporary, used to go down to devotions with him, and they'd all be sent to devotions. And at benediction, there were a whole pile of candles at one side and a whole pile of candles at the other side. And 2 altar boys would proceed to light each side. And Patsy Brown would always bet my father 6pence that the fella on the right would be finished before the fella on the left. And invariably, being a Brown, he collected. It took my father about 40 years to find out that he had paid one for a tuppence to go snow, showing a profit of 4 pence in every 6 pence. Of course, what I'm concerned, the interest really, to some extent, was the ballads. And when I was growing up, I didn't have any interest in ballads. I don't mind telling you. I was more interested in pop music. But I came around gradually, and my father started, when I was growing up in the late 40s, early 50s, the ballad was most unpopular. And if there was a guy singing inside in the pub, they'd say, well, Daddy, just shut up. Now they'd say, well, you shut up and listen to the man singing. But he blazed the trail in that way with a program called The Ballad Maker's Saturday Night, or as somebody called it, The Salad Maker's Saturday Night, which went out from Radio Air, and then he invented this kind of a way of putting this program across of a shanachie leading up to a song, and then the song would be sung, and the shanachie would tell the story behind the song in his own inimitable way. And this program really mushroomed all over the country, and it struck a chord. And the result was that ballads and songs avalanched into our house. And there were so many songs coming in. My father wasn't able to read music, so he sent to America for a wire recorder. It was in pre-tape days. And he brought it around to Puck Fair, and he collected songs all over the place. I came across this among his effects recently, which may be of interest. It's Untoastal Trolley lecture with singers and wire recorder. The ballad is coming back by Bryan McMahon, Listowel at TCLS Hall on Saturday night at 8:30 p.m. Dulwich Dock, entry 1 shilling 5 pence. If you have any unusual ballad, Mr. McMahon will be pleased to record it on his wire recording machine. About 1948, he wrote a feature, a radio feature for the BBC called "I Was Born in the Marketplace," and anybody who's read the book will know that he was born near to the marketplace, and his father was a weighmaster, and he used to be in and out of the market a lot. But this feature just gave all that background. There was sound effects, and we had no telephone in our house at that time. And W.R. Rogers, who was a producer with the BBC, Bertie Rogers was a very well-known poet and very well-known producer in the north of Ireland, wrote a letter to my father saying, look, you have included a ballad in this. He had a ballad singer singing in the marketplace, you see. The Boston Burglar, in pardon to Your Excellency. And he was looking for the air of this. He didn't know what the air was. So he said to my father, look, I've got no phones to my father. So look, he said, what's the number of the kiosk in the square? So I gave him the number of the kiosk and said, look, I'll ring at 12 o'clock midnight, and I'll give you a countdown. I'll turn on a tape machine. I said I had a tape machine in the BBC, whatever it was in the stall at that time. And he says, you can sing it into it. That's fine. So my father goes down to the square at about 5 to 12 and rings up. We were on the hand phone that time, we didn't dial out. And there was a fellow, we'll say his name is Jimmy Reedy, which it wasn't, on the telephone operating, an operator. Local operator. So my father says, Jimmy, look, the BBC know everything. Right, Bryony, we'll be fine, but we'll be all right. We'll put it through the minute it comes through. So phone rings. I put it up. Hello, is that you, Brian? Yes, me here. Bertie here. I'm going to give you a countdown now, Brian, for the Boston Burglar. I'm going to count from 5, and then you'll sing the song into it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I was born and raised in Boston. Go on, Brian, raise it! I'm frightfully sorry. I think we've got to cross the line. Jereen, will you get off the phone? Right, Brian? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3. Born and raised in Boston, the place you all know well. Right? Oh. So it went on like that until eventually the tape was made. Anybody who will have read his books, of course, will know that classical music and his efforts at the pianoforte perished on the rocks of Bourne. That's nice. Perished when he tried to learn music from Miss Marshall down the square. He heard the ballad singer out in the fair day, out through the open window. And he just threw the whole lot up and ran and never came back to classical music, but I think he has left his mark on ballads. And he really had a feel for them. And I remember one of the songs that he made up was The Valley of Knocknanewer. A lot of other people have claimed it in the meantime, and I don't think he ever registered it as such, except that it was printed by Bob Cuthbertson, who was the local printer here, and was a Scottish Presbyterian who came to Ireland and published seditious literature on behalf of the old IRA, and he had very funny little blocks and printing blocks. You would have the letter A on one side and you'd have a coffin on the other side, which would be impressed if you wanted to send a warning to some agent or some landlord. But Bob was a patriot in his own Presbyterian way in less ecumenical times. But he printed these, Bob printed these, my father made them up, and that was the old ballad sheet, the broadsheet. That's the Valley of Knocknanewer now on that one. And they were sold at fairs, markets. Travelling singers called for them and paid maybe 6pence for 50 and sold them at a penny or 2pence each. I remember seeing a very famous singer here in the late 40s, John Wilson, and he used to sing the Valley of Knocknanewer tremendously well. And I remember him having a huge crowd around him, and tears coming down people's faces as they watched him sing the Valley of Knocknanewer. That'd be 48, you see, that wouldn't be that terribly long after 1921. Perhaps I'll just give you a few verses out of this. It's only 40 verses and I want to tell you long. It's not exactly 40 verses, but as you know, it was about an ambush out here in Knocknanewer, which is 4 or 5 miles from the Stole. About 3 men were killed. You may sing. Sorry. After being up shouting at Kerry today, my voice isn't the best, so I apologise for that beforehand. You may sing and speak about Easter week, of the heroes of '98, of the Finuge men who roamed the glen in victory or defeat. Their names are placed on history's page, their memories will endure. Not a song is sung for our darling sons in the valley of Knocknanewer. There was Welsh and Lions and Dalton boys, they were young and in their pride. In every house, in every town, they were always side by side. The Republic bold they did uphold, though outlawed on the moor. But alas, 'twas late, they met their fate in the valley of Knocknanewer. 'Twas on the neighbouring hillside that we listened in calm dismay. In every house, in every town, a maiden knelt to pray. They're closing in around them now with a rifle fire so sure. And Dalton's dead and Lyons is down in the valley of Knocknew. But ere the guns could seal his fate, Condé had broken through. With a prayer to God, he spun the saddles against the hill he flew. The bullets pierced his proud young flesh, yet he cried with a passion pure, my revenge I'll get for my comrades yet in the valley of Knocknew. I met with Dalton's mother, and to me she did say, may God have mercy on their souls who fell in the fight today. Could I but kiss his cold, cold lips, my aching heart 'twould cure, and I'd gladly lay him down to rest in the valley of Knocknew. The summer sun, it is sinking now behind the field and lea. The pale, pale moon is rising way out beyond Tralee. The dismal stars are pale and wan and darkening all the moon. And the banshee cried when our heroes died in the valley of Knocknew. I was glad to see that Her Excellency was in Croke Park recently watching hurling in the lakes. So she'll know all about this song now and about the great hero Christy Ring. Just a little background to the song. My father was a great hurling fan and hurled a lot in his youth more than football. But he was in Dingle one day and he had written this song a good bit before for Christy Ring, and Christy was mad about this song and even sang it himself about himself. But my father was below at Dingle Pier one day and he was writing away, engrossed on whatever thoughts were his outpourings onto paper. He started to say that a bad ink is better than a good memory. But as he was doing this, there was a knock came to the window of the car and he put it down. And he said, let's go get home. Do you know who's there? No. My father looked blankly at him. And he said, Christor Orin. And Orin is Ryan. And it's ring in Irish. So it just didn't click with my father. Who was there? The bold, famous Christy Ring. So he kind of passed him off a little bit. And he went away a bit disgruntled, did Christy Ring. And about an hour later, suddenly the mallet hit my father's head there and he said, oh my God, that's Christy Ring. And I let him go and I was so little of him. What will he think of me, blah, blah. If you didn't meet Christy about a half an hour later again in Dingletown. So he went over to apologise to him and said, Christy, look, he said, I was at that time focused completely on getting this down on paper. And it's the very same now as if you were above in Croke Park taking a 21-yard free and a young fella came over and said, will you sign my autograph? So Christy accepted that one. I was then, about maybe 12 or 14 years ago, Donegal Doolin was doing a television programme and he asked me would I come down and sing the song at Christy Ring's house. And it was a wintry day and it was snow and all that. And I said, okay, I will. And I went down and I met Christy Ring below, and I never saw such Duffy Circus hadn't as many wagons that RTE had at time. They seem to be travelling a bit more light now. There may be about 40 producers less now than they had at that time, but at all events, there was a little trophy room and the camera was so big it couldn't get in, so they had to lift up the window like that, and I sang inside and I sang the song inside. So I met Christy and spoke to him, and he said to me, "Come out here." So we went out in the back and there was a little field at the back. It was like a 3/4 size billiard table. It was a beautiful field now, like about 3/4 size of a full size pitch. And he said to me, "That's where we are, boy. We're there Sunday and Monday before Mass and after Mass. We're in there training." He said, "Boy, there isn't a man in Ireland that mind you after it." I said to myself, there wasn't a man in Ireland that would mind you. But anyway, I did that, and about 2 weeks later, I was inside having my tea one night, bell rings. Donegal down at the door, "Give me a glass of whiskey quick." "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Ring is after dying." He said, "I'm after hearing it on the radio, coming through it there." And he was. And they brought out the programme practically immediately as a tribute to him, and the song was sung. So he was something else, was Christy Ring. And then I had the pleasure and the privilege of singing it at the unveiling of the statue in Clyne, which was unveiled by Jack Lynch sometime afterwards. So I'll just sing maybe a few verses of it as well. Come gather round me, boys, tonight, and raise your glasses high. Come Rocky's bars and rover stars, let welcome hit the sky. Let bonfires blaze in heroes' praise, let Shandon's echoes fling. Far homeward bound with hurling crown, comes Cork's own Christy Ring. When we were young we read in school how in the days of yore the young Satanta showed his worth with shield and spear of gold, while hurling hard on royal sword he'd hurling heroes fling. My soul today he'd yield and sway had he met Christy Ring. So all you hurlers from the Knoll, you lads from Slaney side, from Garryowen both gay and bold, with tips on men beside, you may have hurlers great and small, who can come on swing. Ah, but who's the name to play the game with Cork's own Christy Ring? How oft I've watched him, how oft I've watched him in Croke Park, move here and there with grace, in Cork, Killarney, Thunderstown, or by the Shannon's race. Now Cork is better, the hay is saved, the thousands wildly sing. Ah, they speak too soon, my sweet garçon, for here comes Christy Ring. Though death has claimed this warrior bold and ended now the fight, still o'er the fire we still admire his stick and trophies bright. Come counties all, both great and small, who can a hurley swing? Can one tonight on candlelight with Cork's own Christy Ring? Finally, I would like to sing a little song which I made for my father on his 85th birthday. And the copy of it I got for Her Excellency when she launched the Storyman in Dublin some years ago. It's called Golden Leaves. Will I think of it though? I will. Where are the days of my youth gone? In the wink of an eye have flown, stolen by time, that vagabond thief. I feel it in flesh and in bone. How I laughed as I ran through the barefoot fields, full sure I would never grow old. For I've lived and I've seen the leaves that were green turn to a fine shade of gold. Youth's thrown away on the young, so they say. It's a theory with which I don't hold. For I've had my say and I've lived every day, and asked not for whom the bell tolled. The swallows are leaving, I feel autumn's chill. Still memory sweet fills my soul. And the leaves that I've seen, and which once were so green, now turn to a beautiful gold. I am left on my own, like the warrior Roisin. My partner and comrades departed, but the seeds of my loins and the fruits of my mind will ensure that I'll never be downhearted. And regardless of age, the words on a page my name will forever uphold. And the leaves that I've seen, and which once were so green, now falling in showers of gold.
Bryan McMahon, the scale agus the sar or at this juncture, it is appropriate that we acknowledge the presence of Christine Fitzgerald here this evening. And as you all know now, I'm sure Christine was Brian's secretary and friend for many, many years. Our next contributor will be Peggy Sweeney, and as you know also, Peggy is possibly the greatest local exponent of the songs of Sean McCarthy, and tonight she's going to sing two songs from Brian. One, My Silver River Field, and those of you who have engaged in sing-songs will know at this stage that this has become the international anthem of Listowel on many an occasion here and far afield. And she will also sing The Hounds of Glenelg. So Peggy Sweeney, thank you.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, my first song tonight is called The Hounds of Glenelg. Glenelg is a little townland about 5 miles from here on the Listowel-Tralee Road. Bryan McMahon spent many a day in Glenelg with the huntsman. He was a keen huntsman, and this is a very special song. It mentions the names of the people he hunted with and the townlands where they travelled. It's a long song, but I will not omit any verse. They're all too important. See by the horizon the ocean lies shining, Mount Brandon's reclining is calm and serene. The hills of Glenrodry the sunset is brightening, while the smoke from the cottage is tall on the scene. The call of the shepherd comes clear from the mountain. The field through North Kerry winds peaceful and slow. When all that is tranquil is rudely awakened by the deep-hearted strains of the hounds of Glencoe. See, Renard is golden, and there he goes roving. He twists and he turns, he's the master's own hue. He pauses to sniff the mad winds of the evening, and pointing his crushins, he fades from our view. You'll pay for your crimes now, my tawny marauder. The hens and the chickens, the turkeys you owe. For here they come roaring with music full-throated. North Kerry's avenged the hounds of Glencoe. First Brendan comes racing in fiercest elation. He's master and prince of the huntsmen we've here. Beside him is Johnny, like Finn in his glory, while Bodie and Noel, they come flying like a deer. There's dear Johnny Cotton from distant Dungagan. There's Dinny the hurler and Barry called Joe. There's a grand brace of dance have come up from Kilfinney, while Son and Steve Fuller, they shout for Glencoe. I daren't draw bridle, lest the hounds would go idle. They check in the trailer, bogged down in the mire. There's Mick Buddy's father, the Hunts and Brent Whalen, and peerless Pat Casey, his dark eyes afire. There's mighty Jack Summers and brave Michael Savage, 3 quills and 3 Macs for to raise tally-ho. I own to high heaven there's friendship for 7 on the day in the hills with the boys from Glencoe. Once caught in Kilfinney as daylight was fading, the fox slipped away and was gone like a ghost. At the den mouth we stationed and warned young Gerald, come hell or high water, to stick to his post. But the red dog lit out for a glen beyond Charlie's, and mile after mile we traversed full of woe, till at 2 in the morning we thought of our sentry. He was faithful but frozen, the boy from Glencoe. How often we sat at the butt of a turf reek, while the winds drifted in from the western shore. We whisper the stories of fairies and pookas, the ball made of gold and the Earl of Banmore. We prayed for poor Bucky, who too loved the hillside, when red with the heather and bright with the snow. And by the blue blazes looked pussy goes chasing, and away like red Satans the hounds of Glencoe. I'll whisper the townlands I've known since my childhood, as a crone in the corner will pray evermore. Drumclough and Clondouglas with Palace and Crotta, Knockreek and Kilsynen, Kilflynn, Eramore. Mount Cole, Ballygarrett, with Lyronstat's mountain, and Mookanook too is another I know. How oft have your hillsides and valleys resounded to the blood-stirring cry of the hounds of Glencoe. Grip tight to your nation, my young men of Erin, nor barter your birthright for pottage of gold. What use is the husk of the corpse of a nation when the kernel is eaten and the spirit is sold? And learn the true meaning of valor and freedom, like the light-hearted bagels who range high and low. So be fearless and faithful, be swift and tenacious, hold fast to your trail like the hounds of Glencoe. And the day that ye plant me, one blessing you'll grant me, and I'll sleep though my breast be as cold as the stone. On the way to the graveyard, he'll halt at Jack Leahy's, and hush for a moment your lonesome home, and pray that the silence that down from the highlands will brighten red blood into noon's living glow. I'll hear the wild echoes I've treasured since childhood, the blood-stirring cry of the hounds of Glencoe. My second song is My Silver River Field. This is a ballad Chief Bryan gave me many months ago. This is one of my favourite songs. I think what Bryan taught me the song himself. And I think I'll stand behind here for this one. I hope you can see me. My heart tonight is lonely for my sire land, though many miles of ocean lie between. My heart tonight is home again in Ireland, with many a smiling buchel and colleen. Ah, would that in that green isle o'er the billows 1 hour of youth this roving lad could steal. I'd stand again entranced beside the willows, upon thy banks my silver river feel. I mind me when I walked the summer meadows beside my Nora of the glowing face. Her features teased my many hazel shadows, showed loveliness and gentleness and grace. Our lovely river brimmed with silver over, the smell of gorse beside us we could feel. And there she parted from her foolish rover, upon thy banks my silver river feel. I've had success, or so the world reckons. I've everything I've wanted at my hand, but oh, the seas an Irish river beckons, and how can I deny its clear command? For what are riches when the heart is aching, and what is wealth when all my senses reel? To stand again and watch the red dawn breaking along thy banks, my silver river feel. Tonight I see a cottage fire gleaming, the elves are dancing in the fairy ring, while up the stream comes silver salmon teeming, alive with all the urgencies of spring. And when the good God thinks it's time for a homing, perhaps he let my weary spirit steal, to linger for a moment in the gloaming above thy banks, my silver river feel.
We're delighted to have in our presence tonight Charles Collar and his wife Shirley, and as you know, Charles is the son of the late lamented Carol McCarthy. We are also delighted to have Edie, who's the Ambassador Secretary, and our friends Austin and Anna Slattery from Ennis in County Clare. How shall I describe our next guest? Well, if he was a cowboy, he'd be the fastest draw in the West, because this man shoots from the hip with a verse for every occasion and eventuality. I'm speaking, of course, of Dan Keane.
I'm on an exhibition now for 98. You know they say you should never let anything go with any man because you could be sorry after. But early tonight I met John Murphy, and you know what he said to me? You were after Peggy Sweeney. I said, I beg your pardon, we're good friends, but that's all the same. You know, by the humour, Chrissy Nolan mentioned tonight about being down to the axle. And I don't know what story did it remind me of, but every story remind me until gone again, so I'm down to the axle now. But anyhow, Gary was talking, Gary McMahon, and he mentioned there about his father bringing in the primroses and having the summer inside in the house. But it reminded me of a couple who got married. And of course I got the world of wedding presents. But there was one wedding present I was mad about, a little cuckoo clock. The wife said it was beautiful. She was a lover of nature, and she'd have nature inside in the house summer and winter. It was going great for a while, but after a tumble, didn't the love start to die down, and the man started to get dry. And he was going out to the pubs every night. And every night coming home, it was later. And he was cursing the cuckoo clock for it was giving away the time. But this night he came in, and just as he came in the door, what went off at 5 o'clock in the morning but the cuckoo clock. And of course it said cuckoo 5 times. But one man was a quick thinker, what did he do? He said cuckoo 6 more times, so we had to go 11. They were at breakfast, and the wife said to him, Jack, you'd want to look after that clock. And innocent old Jack said, what clock? The cuckoo clock. I see nothing wrong with it. There's something wrong with it. And what's wrong with it, says Jack? I don't know what's wrong with it. But this morning at 6 o'clock, at 5 o'clock, it said cuckoo 5 times, and then it said feck you and said cuckoo 6 more times. Telling out the big that here, I have to be in Scotland tomorrow at 3 o'clock, so I won't keep it too long. But there was one thing there that I was thinking of, that Bryan McMahon, would we say he was transformed, that he was changed one day, and it was the day of a Munster final. I don't know how many of you remember it. Maybe the most of you letting on that you're too young to remember it. But I remember Gary McMahon scored 3 goals for Kerry in the Munster final against Cork. And can any of you remember what my hollow hair said? He said, this morning, Gary McMahon was the son of a famous father. This evening, Bryan McMahon is the father of a famous son. I don't want to tell you anything but that will upset you, but I was one day in hospital and there was this woman inside, you know, she was the patient. Well, I didn't meet her, for I was in the men's ward, but I was told. She was Mary Ann Murphy, and she was the most awful crank. And even when she went into the hospital, she came up when she was best at grousing and grumbling. But this morning, a nurse came in, and the doctor said to the nurse, how's Mary Ann Murphy today? And Mary Ann Murphy said, she isn't complaining at all today, doctor. Oh my, says I never thought she'd go so quick. But while I was in hospital, John B came in to see me, and someone asked the question, being the same name, are they related? And John B said, of course we are, where would he get the portrait? But anyhow, we started it down. And finally, what amazed both of us, we were tracing back over the years and found that there was a spark of a relationship between myself and John B. Now that's all right, John B accepts that. I don't want to say anything that looks at the McMahons. But I might know my grandmother was Bridget McMahon. And Brian always claimed, once he told me, he claimed that she was the same McMahon. And I don't know whether it was me I brought it or not, but I was always a great friend of Brian's. And I'll tell you something that took place at Brian's house, which anybody don't know anything about. It was on the 8th of December, 1936. My sister Teresa, who worked with Brian, I don't know how long she worked there, but on the 8th of December, she closed Brian's door behind her and she left for Australia with Brian's uncle. And she's still in Australia. And at 12 o'clock today, I was speaking to her on the phone and I told her about what's on tonight. And she told me to convey all her affections to the McMahons. And she still wanted to hear anything because when Brian died, I had to make sure I sent to the Kerryman. And she had an awful great love for Brian, and the few times she came home, she called to see him. And when her family came to Ireland, they all made sure they called to see Brian. But Brian was 80 years. We're all children on, I suppose, in years, but when Brian was 80, I wrote this little verse which I gave to Brian. He was 80 years, and I remember what he said to me, if we get 5 more, won't it be great? But he got more than the 5. But anyhow, this is the verse. And I tried to analyse Brian's life and to put it into a concentrated form, like a tablet you would get to put a lot of powder into one small tablet. 80 years of living, one long genial smile, gathering wisdom and giving, o'er each every measured mile, reckoning all as equal, loving the old and young, pride in the native people, pride in the native tongue, rich in the lore of the bygone, filling the patriot part, searching the soul of Ireland through the windows of... I have judged fancy dresses all over the country, and I thought the most beautiful I ever saw was in the store a group of children with a rainbow cut out in half-board and painted. And I thought it was beautiful, Children of the Rainbow, a beautiful title. He got the 5 years and a few more with it. He passed away, and due to the fact that I haven't as loose in the limbs as I used to be, I made sure to come in time and to get around. And this is what I wrote after going home from Brian's wake, and it is to the memory of Brian. In Memoriam is the name of it. I touched his hand, 'twas cold in death. Came from his lips no voice, no breath. The eyes that once with life did leap were closed in their eternal sleep. To features fair and so benign, my soul in silence whispered Bryan, while she who'd penned his words for years typed out our sorrow in her tears. His hand-clasp warm was no more, and yet beyond the morning door we clasped warm hands and wished relief could still assuage the mourner's grief. For he who had answered heaven's call, he was a friend and loved by all. The heart that loved life's every stream in stillness closed its mortal dream. And yet no grave can ever claim the living heart, the quenchless flame, the banner that his pen unfurled in lasting bouquets round the world. So rich and so rewarding still, the gifts of an unwritten will. And as every story, script and scroll bequeaths his love, his song, his soul. Bryan
Next we have a man who had the privilege of having half a century of friendship with the late Bryan McMahon from the time he came to Listowel in the early 40s and set up the Listowel drama group with Bryan. I refer of course to Far na Scairta Shanachie Eamon Kelly.
Carde, ambassador a híse. Winter go léir. Is even agus is amsa lum a venúr measc a nocht. Agus sin a trácht Bryan McMahon a héal agus a héir. Bryan McMahon told me a tale out of school. And it was a bit against him, but he didn't mind that. He was teaching the third class about the senses, hearing, sight, touch, feeling. And he put a glass of water on the rostrum in front of him. And he said, "No, boys, what do we hear?" And they said, "A glass of water." "And what sense did we use?" And he said, "The sight, sir." Well, he took down that glass of water and he brought up 2 glasses. And he put 2 glasses of water on the rostrum in front of him. And he said to the lads, he said, "We have 2 glasses of water this time." But he said, "There is a difference. Into one I have put some salt. Now, which sense do we use to find out in which one the salt is?" And a shower of hands went up. A mountain of hands, a forest of hands went up. So he pointed to one young man, and he said, saying what I said before, he said, "Sight, sir." And Bryan said, "Look," he said, "if you kept looking at those 2 glasses," he said, "until doomsday," he said, "you wouldn't know in which one the salt was." And then a very fat boy put his hand up at the end of the class. And Bryan said, "Well, Jim, what is it?" He said, "Sir," he said, "if you kept looking at those 2 glasses until doomsday," he said, "the water would evaporate out of the 2 glasses and the salt would be left in the bottom." Bryan McMahon was the first man I met when I came to Listowel. I came into Listowel on a bicycle. And there was a saying that time in the town that a stranger coming in on a bicycle, that you should be nice to him because he might end up as chairman of the urban council. But at the time I didn't drink, smoke, play cards, go with women that bitten horses, or take an active interest in politics. So I had no designs on the chamber, on the council chamber. Bryan had a lending library then, and I went there and I took out a book. And when he saw my name, he said, "Eamon Kelly, didn't I hear that name called out in the wireless the other night?" And sure enough he did. Austin Clarke had a poetry competition on the radio, and I entered a few verses about teaching woodwork out in Dua, Knocknagoshel and Ashdee. Well, it didn't win any prize, but like the mongrel at the dog show, I was highly commended. That fact, you see, that I was, there was a bit of ink somewhere, you know, it gave Bryan a handle on me, and we became friends. And Bryan then had started the drama group, and he was director, and I was delighted when he asked me if I'd take part, if I'd become a member. Of course, he didn't ask me right away. Bryan let the dust settle first before he asked me and made sure that I was a sort of good sort of character. But I did, and I had been in a play in Waterville, and that play ran for some time, and then it transferred to the West End of Cahersiveen. I was in Listowel when Bryan had all his original successes. I was there when he started writing stories for the Bell, and we used to look forward to the magazine each month and turn over the pages, you know, the off-white wartime pages of the Bell. And I was there when he won his first award for a story called The Ring. I think the bones of the story was given to him by his wife Kitty. And I was there when his first play was presented in the Abbey Theatre, The Bugle and the Blood. And I remember a whole lot of Listowel people all went up to Dublin, and Timothy Fitzmarshall Cotter panicked in the lift because it was his first time. When the lift moved, he panicked because it was his first time in the lift. And I was there when he wrote, as Gary had mentioned, I was born in the marketplace for the BBC when radio was a power in the land. And now, because Bryan was so taken up with all his extra writing, he didn't have time for directing in the drama group, and because I had served an apprenticeship of a couple of years, and I learned more from him about the stage than I ever picked up afterwards from the most professional of producers. He knew a whole lot about the basic fundamental things of the stage. And because he was taken up now, I was given the job of directing, and sometimes I wore three hats. I was a director, an actor, and set designer. And we did plays, and we took them many plays, we took them to many festivals, and we won many prizes. I became a neighbour of Bryan's because I was living across the street in Hotel Moran. And when Bryan would come home from school in the afternoon, he'd come down the street, he'd go into his own house, he'd have a meal. And every single afternoon he went for a rest. All his life he went for a rest. And I do the same thing. He picked that up from him, and it is a very good tonic, and I recommend it to anybody. Go for a rest in the afternoon if you have the time. And I got into the habit of calling for him. The key was always in the door. It's a changeless door now. The key was in every door in the street that time. So I'd go over and turn the key and go in. There was a big armchair in the kitchen. I'd sit down. There was a cup of tea from Kitty, his wife. And then, when he was ready, we'd go for a round of the square. And we'd go out into the street, but we didn't walk very far before we stopped, and we went into Dan Flavin's bookshop. And me Hall would be inside the counter, and he'd motion us into the back kitchen, and we'd go in, and we'd sit down in the back kitchen talking to Dan Flavin, and Dan would recite for us again, within the ring of Sally's. Within the ring of Sally's, I'll build a house of stone, a little house, and white with lime, and thatched with sedge of yestertime, and live me all alone within a ring of Sally's, where I was sometime known. And Dan Flavin then would drum his fingers on the table, and he would say, as he always said, within the ring of Sally's, by Patrick Kelly, the only thing he wrote, blast you. we would talk about books. Dan was in love with books, and we would talk about politics and various things, and then we'd go out into the street. And walking down the street, I got to know the people of Listowel so quickly from walking down the street with Bryan because he stopped to talk to everybody. He was the most gregarious man you ever met in all your life. And he had a word for everyone, and if the people were old, if it was an old person and the old person was alone, he always had an inquiry about the partner that hadn't been seen out for a few days. And then we go around the corner and into Moss Scanlon's shop, which Gary had mentioned already. Moss Scanlon was a harness maker, and he sat inside this big window, and it was fascinating to see him putting the wax on the thread, waxing the thread, and then with the awl, he'd sew a bit of leather onto the horse's collar, or he might repair a straddle for making ubrichen. He watched the world go by outside. And Listowel is always interested in the world. And more interested in his wife. The ear is always cocked for the stray word coming in the breeze. And if you're not careful, they'll build a nest inside that unlistening ear. But then having left there, we go around the square, do a round of the square. And as Bryan went along, it was a habit of people at that time, people of Bryan's generation, to draw to them a verse, to pluck a stanza from the atmosphere, as it were. And he would recall places like London and Montreal and St. Kiernan's City Fair. And as we walked along, it was like the famous school in Greece, the peripatetic school. He was Aristotle and I was his pupil, and I learned from him. I learned more from him. And then coming towards the end of the time when I was about to change my mind, he was the person who changed my mind from me. He turned my nose into the wind, gave me a tap on the shoulder and said, "Follow your star." And that I did. Then we left, we walked from there into William Street, and we meeting people all the time. Meet Bunny Dalton. Bunny Dalton was for a time was a porter in the Bank of Ireland in the square, and before that he had been a temporary postman out the country. And there was a woman passing in a donkey car, and she saw him standing in the door of the bank, and she was curious. Most country people are, God bless them, they're very curious. She was curious as to what he was doing there, and she wanted to know what his duties were. And when he said to her, "Ma'am," he said, "do you know the greyhounds and the sixpences?" "I do," she said. "Well," he said, "my job is walking them out." There was a big flood at the time in the late 1940s, and the waters went into the houses up in Kilmorna and washed the furniture out of the houses. And Bunny said to us from the height of that flood, he said that there was a man seen floating down the river in a bed, and his wife accompanied him on the piano. Our last port of call was Bob Cuthbertson. Gary has spoken about Bob's. Bob's was the most intriguing place. And Bryan, because he wrote, of course, the printer shop was a place he'd be attracted to. And the printing press that Bob had, there was a big fat metal cap on the top of it. And it was so old that a wife from Charles Street said that it printed INRI for the cross. Bob would keep the posters that he was doing, the first proof, the first pull of the poster, they'd be all kept until Bryan would call at that particular time in the evening. And nothing went to press, nothing was put to bed until Bryan corrected the proof, and he wouldn't trust anybody else. Bob also, as well as printing the posters, he printed the ballads that Gary spoke about. And there were Bryan's ballads, and Bryan wrote ballads about everything. He wrote ballads about the Kerry team when they played in New York, in the polo grounds in New York, and he wrote ballads about them when they played at home. You cannot beat the kingdom sweet for horse or hound or man. And his ballad about the Listowel races, they came from Castlell and they came from Tralee, and I forget what kind of fellow who came from Fiji. There were Dutchmen and Frenchmen a Turk on a pole, and it was more like Geneva than lovely Listowel. The strange thing about the ballads was that they were printed in different coloured paper. And the reason for that was there was yellow paper and green paper and blue paper and white. And the travelling ballad singers, the travellers themselves who sold the ballads, were unable to read or write. But if a song, the same song would be printed on the same coloured paper. So if you asked for them for The Shores of America, which is a very famous song at the time, The Shores of America, if you asked for that song, Ollie would take out the red one and give it to you, or the blue one and give it to you. So, and when we were doing this Honey Spike in the Abbey Theatre, Brian's last play that was done there, I was shocked to find that the travellers in the scene in Puck Fair were selling sheaves of ballads down the street. And do you know what they had? Sheet music. Couldn't get over it. And I unfortunately, I had in a drawer at home some of the ballads which Bob Culbertson gave to me, and I brought them in the next day, and I gave them to the prop man, and they were copied and zeroed, and they had the real thing. But there was one place that Brian didn't ever bring me, because he couldn't bring me there because they'd come to the end, and that was the Story House in the Glown. And there was a house there where stories were told, and where some of the stories were so long that they'd come back the next night to hear it, to hear the end of it. And Tommy O, I think, was the storyteller's name, and I think he was blind, and when the wireless of the blind came in, he was given a wireless, and it was put going in the windowsill, and that drew his audience away from him. And on that theme, and on the death of the storyteller himself, Brian wrote one of his most wonderful short stories. That was the one called The Good Dead and the Green Hills. And he told me one of the stories that he heard in that house. Brian said, look, I have a great phrase of his, I'll give you the bones of it. I'll give you the bones of it, and you can dress it up yourself. Which I did. I know of the present crowd that's going to England, doing as well over as John L's son Richie. It's a long time since he went. He did a good job over, I heard it now, but like that and everything else has gone away out of my head. Whatever it was, he was making kining, and every halfpenny he spent it in himself, and a fine dash he cut in a blue suit, a watch and chain and a velour hat. He'd be prominent at every amusement, and there was, this night he was at a dance, and he made up with a big swanky one, and himself and herself were out on the floor in every set. Faith coming on to the end of the night, he put the question to her, was there any chance of the convey? And she didn't raise any objection, and away they went. And when they came to her father's house, he was inclined to back the gate pier. And she said no, she said come on away in and meet the family, and she was right, because delays are dangerous. She went in with him, and she went in with him, and her father turned out to be a lord. Look at that. The bottle of whiskey was produced. Well, if they didn't have it, no one would have it. And after a few smarts my hands all round, the young lady said to her father, I'm going to marry this young man. Will you whisht, you mopsy? Says the father. When everyone knows you can marry no one lord than an earl. How do we know where he came out of? Likely as not he was born in a tent, hinting at a certain thing. Was I now, says Richie, getting very tetchy in himself, I'd have you know that my father is Earl of Banmore. It'll be easy check up on that, says the Lord, sending upstairs for his agent, and the agent came down, and the Lord dispatched him over to Ireland to find out if there was such a man as the Earl of Banmore, and to see how he was situated. So, the Earl, the agent, after a while going around the countryside, he came to the townland of Banmore, where there was a long boreen, that's a cut of laneway, a long boreen, going up to a house, small house, no bigger than my own, no great scope in it, only a room and a kitchen. And at the two sides of the boreen up along, you had goats, with only their heads and their beards and their horns up over the two fences up along. And the agent, being a man from the city and never seen a goat before, he looked at him and said, "Come on, I'm in." He went up into the yard, and an old man came to the door. And the agent says to him, "Are you the Earl of Banmore?" "Who else?" said the old man. "There's no other one of that surname in this town land. Won't you bowl in?" So he went in. And when the old man found out that he was from England, he filled him up with every sort of a story. The old man talking away, and the agent inside in the corner, fit to split. And Mrs. Earl was there too. She was fostering around, and in no time at all, she had a fine supper up on the table for the agent. And below the bottom of the kitchen, you had this contraption going. Well, for all the world, it was like as if you had two creamery churns, 2 milk tanks, and there was a fire under one of them, and there was roly-bowly pipes going from one to the other, and a nice little drip out into a white enamel bucket. And every now and again, the old man would go down and bring up the full of a low saucepan and give it to the agent. So the heel of the hunt, the agent was Pallet. He didn't know whether he was in heaven or in hell. Now, bedtime came, and where were they going to put him? They couldn't very well put him into number 10. So what did the old man do? On you go out in the field and cut a bath of green rushes. And he brought in the green rushes, and he spread them on the flag of the fire. And he says to the agent, "Bunk yourself down there now." So the agent did. And when he got up in the morning, the old man came in with a pike, and he threw all the green rushes out in the yard. And after the breakfast, the agent went off over to England, and when he landed over, the Lord said to him, "Tell me," he said, "is there such a man in Ireland as the Earl of Banmore?" "I can be sure there is," says the agent. "And tell me," says the Lord, "how is he situated?" "I tell you now," he said, "that man," he said, "is so powerful," he said, "that to get to his residence, I had to pass through a mile-long rank of soldiers with fixed baits." And he said, "He is so wealthy, he has his own distillery." And to give you a further instance of him, he said, "the bed that I slept in last night," he said, "will never be used again," he said, "for to throw out in the morning." The Lord say to that? What could anyone say to it? Richie married the lady, and from that day out, he never did a hand's turn, and more looked to him. I was in Trafford in West Cork, and he decided to go and live in the Kerry Gaeltacht. And he mentioned the fact to a local publican. They must be very generous, the publicans in West Cork, because in Dublin, Trafford isn't allowed into the public houses at all. And the publican said to him, "If you're going to go to live in the Kerry Gaeltacht, you'll have to pick up a bit of Irish for that." So he went along to the schoolmaster, the traveller did, and he learned a fair amount, the basic things about Irish. And then when he thought he had a good, fairly good knowledge of it, he got all his family into his motoring transport. They used to sleep and live inside in the motoring transport, and he set out for the Dingle Gaeltacht, and when he was there for about a week, he put in for the dole, and he had to go down to the post office, and the foreign pulled out, and the man inside said to him, "Cad is ended?" And he said, "Dirma Rodrish Goal, August the van?" And he said, "Toyota." I'm going now after this. There were these two poets. Maybe I should sit down. There were these two poets, and they used to go every year to the winter fair in Kinmare, where they'd buy 2 cows for the tub. They liked a bit of corned beef when the days were lengthening out into spring, when they'd be composing. And when they'd buy the 2 cows, they'd tie them outside to the lamppost. And then the 2 poets would adjourn to the nearest public house, where they'd spend the rest of the day and portion of the night exchanging verse, arguing, and insulting people they didn't like. Well, it so happened one night, or one fair day, that they bought 2 black cows. And when they came out, the cows, of course, were perishing, standing there all night, and the 2 poets were fine and warm after all the drink. So when they ripped the 2 cows from the lamppost to get the blood in circulation, the 2 cows began to run off into the night. And the cows were so black, and the night was so dark that they couldn't see them. And when they got out of the light of the town, you know, they had 2 ash plants for driving the cattle, and they were hitting each other as often as they were. And that was the night they had out the road, in gates, out gaps, into fields, and breaking day in the morning they were driving 2 animals out before them, not their own. Not their own. 2 rangy bullocks from the Rossi Valley. And by the time they had spent the rest of the time going around to the schools advertising the fact that the cows had been missing, and by the time they recovered their own cows, they swore that they'd never again get into such a predicament. Well, things rested so, as the man said. Came the following fair day in the winter fair in Kinmare, and people were surprised, neighbours were surprised to see the two poets well after dark inside the public house, you know, and they were well on it, Magalore. So they were talking about it, and the poets are rightly, they knew there was something being said about them. So one of them got up and he said, "We don't give a training about darkness, be it blacker than nature allows. We're prepared for it this time, my buckos. We have purchased 2 handsome white cows." It snowed that night.
Finally, our last contribution is from Owen McMahon, and Owen is going to read an extract from the Master, the final lesson.
Good morning, and thank you indeed. As Dickie Bird said to Breda in the cat, only for I standing for you that day, I wouldn't be here tonight. And only for that man, Eamon Kelly, stood for me, he wouldn't be here tonight. Because he is my godfather, and he mentioned that establishment in the Stole called Hotel Moran. She was my godmother. But to tell a story about Eileen Morden, she was my godmother, and her father was John Z. Morden, who was a great character. I don't remember him. But Eamon, when he came to town, stayed in their house, in Diggs, or in the bed and breakfast place. And every week he would pay his dues. But this particular morning, Eamon was above at 8 o'clock, and he was shaving himself. And a knock came to the door, a very agitated knock came to the door. And Eamon said, "Yes, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Morden here." And he said, "Yes, Mr. Morden. Do you know what day of the week it is, Mr. Kelly?" "No, Mr. Morden, it's the 1st of the month, Mr. Kelly." "Do you know what that means, Mr. Kelly?" "No." "Spondulix, Mr. Kelly." Spondulix, for fear Eamon would forget to pay. But they were the first Christmas present I ever got, I got from that man. He was a woodwork teacher, and he made me a garage, and I will never forget it. Out of timber, and it's one of the earliest memories I have. He was a treasure to have in the house. He practiced his trade on us when we were young. And living in our house, I don't think I ever understood my father, because, and it's only tonight I was realizing why. My father was 3 things to us. He was a parent, a teacher, and a writer. And we never knew which one was, never knew which hat he had on. You know, upstairs he was from 7 to 9, he was writing. He always wrote from 7 to 9. He never deviated from that. Every single night of his life, he wrote from 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock. And you'd hear the strange voices coming down, and you'd hear the stories being hammered out, and you'd see the finished product. But I could never read the finished product. I could never read a story my father wrote until he was dead. And I couldn't understand why, because I could never divorce my parent, my teacher, and the writer. I could never divorce one from the other. He gave Gary his love of ballads. He gave me his love of plays.
drama is what I'm interested in, and that's what he passed on to us. And he never segregated his works to us. He just said, look, there they are. You take what you want out of them and you run with it. And that's why I have fallen in love with the play, The Master. It became a book, but first of all it was a radio play. It was a play performed in 1970 by the Hall Bowling Theatre Cove on RTE, and afterwards it became a full-length play. And it was performed, but there was, the ending of it wasn't correct. And like my father, if he didn't like something, he threw it aside. And he could never bring himself to look at it again. And he'd say, don't talk to me about that. Don't talk to me, don't talk to me. Finished. So years later, I was looking for a play and I got my hands on it. And I said, look, I want to run with this. And he said to me, all right, he says, on one condition, that I see the finished product before you have changed. And he said, you have to let me see it, have to let me see it. So I went away and I rejigged the last act and I changed it around, and he got sick. He got sick 5 years ago, and he was in hospital, and while we were rehearsing he never saw it until it was first night on stage. He said nothing, but 2 nights before he died he called me aside and he said, it worked. It worked. He got my hand and he just said, it worked. Said no more, and he hadn't said it 5 years, we'd gone 5 years after that. So he was, I think, he was repaying the debts at that stage. He was cleaning the slate, he was having his say with every one of us. He wrote in the Storyman, to begin a story is hard, to end it is harder still. And he wrote in the same book, he said, the loveliest greeting anyone can give a friend is to say, will you come? And the saddest reply is, if only. So tonight we're here, we came, and we would say, if only. And I will leave you with his last day in school, which is portrayed in the final scene of The Master, leading up to the final roll call. And as with my father, everything was a story, and a story was everything. So when he began to impart the lesson to the pupils, he wanted to do it in the form of a story. And he started like, time is a peculiar commodity. When one is young, time trudges along on hobnail boots. When one is mature, time dances on patent leather shoes. But when one is old, as I now am old, time has winged heels and races away and away. Teaching in a village school has a gentle monotony that reflects the passing seasons. Infants come in, howling their protests. Senior students leave with their eyes on distant lands. And in between you have the day of the circus, the day of the pattern, the day of the school league, first communion, the day of the coursing. Seaweed, mushrooms, periwinkles, holly, blackberries, horse chestnuts, hurleys, seagrass, spiders, every one of those impinged on the classroom in one form or another. And as I now stand before you, on my last day in school, let me tell you a story. The story I have for you today, it's not Oisin and Tir na Og, it's not Thermopylae, it's not the Spartans or Helen of Troy. No, the story I tell you today concerns an old schoolmaster in Alsace-Lorraine. And it's by a Frenchman named Alphonse Daudet. And the reason I tell you this story is it is about a schoolmaster teaching his very last lesson. Just as I am teaching you here today. And it took place in Alsace-Lorraine, in a small village, a village like Tullig here, in the middle of the last century. A schoolboy arrived late for school one day, and he was surprised to see the classroom lined with villagers old and young. Instead of rebuking the schoolboy, the master told him to take his place among the benches with the other pupils. One old man wore a three-cornered hat, and on his nose he had a pair of spectacles, and in his hand he had a tattered spelling book. The old schoolmaster was tired, but he was determined to carry on. He wore his best clothes, those he only wore on prize-giving day. Villagers and pupils, he began, a law has been passed that from tomorrow German will only be spoken in this school. The French language will no longer be taught. Class will end at noon today. So this is your very last lesson in your own language. And I want you to remember it. And I want you to treasure it. And outside the school, I want you to speak it and to treasure it. Because a people who possess their language possess the key to their prison door. I promise you that. The schoolmaster carried on. At noon, a church bell rang. He heard sound. The sound of the marching Prussians marching into the village. The schoolmaster was very tired. He determined to carry it on, and he said, "Villagers and pupils, this is my last lesson." He couldn't carry on. The sound of the marching feet had disturbed his last lesson. He turned to the blackboard. He picked up the chalk and he wrote, "Vive la France! Vive la France!" Can I end the formal proceedings for the evening and thank you for your attendance, and in particular the McMahon family are deeply honoured with the attendance of Her Excellency the Ambassador of America. He recounts, Your Excellency, of meeting you last year while he was on his perambulations through the streets of Listowel. And he met you and he greeted you, as Eamon would say, like anybody else he greeted, with a warm handshake and a friendly smile. He held you in high esteem, Your Excellency, and we are deeply honoured that you took time to travel here on this very bad summer's evening to be with us tonight. We are eternally grateful to Jimmy Deenan. Tonight would not have been possible without Jimmy's input, without his enthusiasm, without his organising the whole lot. Thank you, Jimmy. My father had a deep affection for you too, Jimmy. He had a terrible high regard for you and everything that you ever did. Carmela Margaret. To you all, I thank you for being in attendance, and I hope that you have derived some pleasure out of the night. The other person we should remember tonight is my mother. In actual fact, she's dead 7 years this very night. She was a Ryan. My father said everyone in Kitty was either a Ryan or O'Connor. And he was given out to her because she had 101 first cousins. When she died, Gary, well, we were talking it over, and we said, what made her unusual? And we said, she was always there. No, we were never cold, we were never hungry, and she was always there. And she was. took after my mother because my father said to me at various stages when I would be like Joe coming back from Ballyburn at 4 o'clock in the morning and I would refuse to get out of bed. At 11 o'clock he'd say to my mother, "Is that unadventurous young man up yet?" Because I had no ambitions to travel in my right direction. We are deeply grateful and honoured that you have come here tonight. We regret that people didn't get in. It wasn't possible to accommodate everybody. And can I just wish you a safe journey home, and again give you my father's parting word when he would see one of us disappearing out the door to a dance. For God's sake, don't die in a car. Good night.
As Bryan himself would say, another day is done, another job is completed, and let's hope that he's pleased with the proceedings here this evening. I'm sure he is. I will now finally call on Jimmy Dean, the chairman of the Sean McCarthy weekend, to wrap up the proceedings.
Thank you. First of all, could I thank Joe for doing such an excellent job this evening. I think he really kept it moving. It was a long program. But I'm sure as you were such a very interested audience that at no stage did it drag at any time, and I'm sure you could take a lot more. I know the ambassador, and you're looking at her, could certainly take a lot more. Now, also could I thank all the people who participated here tonight. I think we put together a wonderful cast of people. It couldn't have been better. It was very hard to match the people that we chose to perform here this evening. They were all, I suppose, chosen for a particular reason because they reflected different aspects of Brian's life. But they were mostly local, except that great man, Eamon Kelly, whom Brian said to me once, Eamon Kelly is a national treasure. And I mean that sincerely, that's no exaggeration, and he is. He's 85 years of age, and who of us could perform like he did here tonight in front of this audience? By the way, the ambassador now is still very young, of course, but you should have seen her perform in the new course in Ballybunion today. And she won as well. Now, we have a very special gift here for the ambassador from the committee. It's a book of poems by, I suppose, one of our greatest poets here in our Kerry, Bob Boland. It's called Thistles and Docks. And as you can see, Ambassador, it's very special. Only 200 were printed, especially bound. And we've even gloves there, so if any people are looking at it, they'll have to wear the gloves. You know, it's for effect as well. So you're getting a copy 190 out of 200. And also we have a video here that was again produced here by Dan Devan and his company, the one we saw some of it up here with Nora Relihan in it. And we're going to present that to you also from the producer here. So Ambassador, we could just step forward and accept the book.
There we are.
The mayor presents to you from our production company. It's called Ireland, the Island of Memories.
Oh,
all yours. You may shout
Now, the next part of the programme will have to be very sharp, and I think that at this stage of the night, the official part of the programme is over, but this is the part of the programme that's very important from our point of view, from the point of view of fundraising. We have just a small raffle to make, but it's very important because it's our main source of revenue. We have 5 prizes here to raffle. One of the prizes is a weekend for 2 at the Skellig Hotel in Dingle, and Maureen McAuliffe is here with us to present the prize here. She has very generously offered this prize to us here, and Marie is here to present us with the prize. Then the second prize is a £50 cash sponsored by Nash's. Third prize, meal for two, sponsored by Miss Dolan's Hotel. Fourth prize, meal for two, sponsored by the Hershey's Bar. Fifth prize, 2 bottles of wine, special wine, I must say, by the corner shop Finuge. And sixth prize, a basket of fruit by Stephen Mulder. The wine that John B was talking about earlier on, that wine, the monks of Ballygunnion. So if we could just, we'll do the draw very rapidly then, and
yeah. Sure, no, thanks.
Now, Marie McCall is here with us from Spectra, the stall, and she's going to win a pig. You're a winner anyway, Marie. She's going to pick the winner of the first prize.
Thank you.
Card number 16. Line 15.
It's probably
line 15.
Claire, quick, one. It's Castle Gregory anyway.
Yeah, number 15. Claire Quirk of Castle Gregory. So. That's fine. Big round of applause there from Marie McCall.
Card number 15.
Card number 15. Line 4.
He Gallagher Naramore Listone.
He Gallagher Naramore Listone.
Card number 23.
Number 12.
Josie Stackhill Crim.
Josie Stackhill Crim. Card number 7. Number 11.
Roshi Homer Navin.
Number 16. Card number 16. Number 4.
Cara Gallagher River Road Finuge.
Number 13. And number 3. Catherine Egan, our first. That's it. So, ladies and gentlemen, just to wrap it up, again, thank you for your attendance here tonight. I would say it will go down as a very special, if not historical occasion, because it may be very difficult to get maybe two people like John B. Keane and Eamon Kelly performing at the same venue on the same night. Hopefully they will in the future for our sake, but it may be difficult to do that. So it was a very special night. It was all in honour of Bryan McMahon, but also in honour of Sean McCarthy. And because of Sean McCarthy and his wife Carol, we've been able to organise this festival. And it has afforded us opportunities like this, and I think that is very important. So hopefully our weekend will go from strength to strength. And with the, I suppose, support of people like the American ambassador, no doubt in the future she will keep in contact with us. We can only go from strength to strength. So thank you all very much, and a safe home. Thank you.
Thank you.